4 years later, the Hillary boys are working for their father when Hitler's troops invade Poland and war breaks out in Europe. New Zealanders in their thousands volunteer for service. Hillary's first instinct is to join the Air Force. But the whole family have recently embraced a fringe Christian faith called radiant living, and they are pacifists. Rex Hillary spends the war behind wire as a conscientious objector. Percival obtains exemption from military service for his eldest son, which troubles Hillary.
I was in a great emotional turmoil. I was losing enthusiasm for radiant living and for religion in general. So I finally persuaded my father to give me a little bit of time off, more or less as a break to think things out. And I decided to go down to the Southern Alps. Well, funnily enough, you know, the first climb I actually did was up that little gully up there. There was a little bit of snow up in it, and there was some attraction that dragged me to climb up over the gravel and find it stand on the snow itself. It really was quite amazing what a sense of achievement I had.
That night in the nearby Hermitage Hotel, Hillary is savouring this triumph when two climbers stride in and are quickly the centre of attention of all the pretty girls.
This was Stevenson and Dick, who had just done a grand traverse of Mount Cook, and everybody was talking to them and surrounding them, and I sort of slunk away in a corner and thought what a miserable, uninteresting life I was leading.
Rebelling against his father, Hillary enlists in the Air Force and trains as a navigator.
Catalinas manned by New Zealanders are tearing out across the Pacific on flights like this. Their task to keep watch over Allied shipping in the sea lanes below.
Routine search and rescue missions are not exciting enough for Hillary. With another airman, Ron Ward, he rebuilds an old boat and between patrols hunts crocodiles. All goes well until an insecure fuel tank ruptures over the engine.
It burst into flame. So I stood up on the seat and I said to Ron, "Jump overboard, Ron," which very sensibly he did. And then I stood up even further onto the seat to jump overboard, but just then we hit a more severe wave, and it jerked me back, and I fell onto the on the covers of the hatch, and I really had a feeling that now I know what a piece of bacon feels like when it's being cooked on the stove.
Invalided home and ordered to convalesce, Hillary instead heads for the hills. Over the next few years, when he isn't beekeeping with his brother, he's in the Southern Alps, honing his climbing skills in preparation for Mount Cook. In 1947, Hillary steps onto the summit of New Zealand's highest peak for the first time. He returns the following year to attempt the daunting, unclimbed South Ridge of Cook.
We camped on top of Nozomi there, rather uncomfortable night. We went up that snow slope ridge initially, and then up the jagged rocky bit. Steep in one or two places, we had to keep on the left-hand side off the corners.
Having dealt to just about every climbing challenge New Zealand has to offer, Hillary is ready for bigger things. So is another young climber, George Lowe. The gregarious teacher who eventually becomes an inspector of schools in Britain is the perfect foil for the shy beekeeper. They both sense this when they run into each other on this glacier below Mount Cook.
And it was then that George said to me, "Ed, have you ever thought of going to the Himalayas?" And I said, "Well, it's funny you should mention that, but I've often had ideas and dreams of going there."
And to say that out loud was, you know, a very bold thing to do because, you know, New Zealanders weren't good enough to go to the Himalayas.
In fact, a Wellington lawyer, Earl Ridderford, is planning an ambitious 10-man expedition to Mount Kanchenjunga in Nepal in the spring of 1951. Unable to secure the necessary permits or finance, the party dwindles to 4, Ridderford, Lowe, Hillary and Ed Cotter. Still determined to climb in the Himalayas, they settle for a shoestring expedition to the Garhwal region in India. 4 weeks after departing New Zealand, travelling by flying boat and ocean liner, they arrive in Calcutta. It is Hillary's first trip to a country he comes to love and will return to many times. July 11th, 1951, the New Zealand expeditions start up the 23,700-foot unclimbed Mount Mukut-Parbot. This is the day Hillary learns a harsh lesson that changes forever the way he climbs mountains. Hillary and Lowe lead, expecting to reach the summit well ahead of their less robust companions.
George and I were actually travelling a good deal faster, but it was very early in the morning and very cold. And both George and I had very, very inadequate footwear. And George said, he'll simply have to stop and warm up his feet.
So while they sat there, we passed them and climbed over the ridge and down into a depression from where we could view the upper mountain.
We actually thought that they would wait. We were very naive about all this. We thought they would wait until we were ready to carry on, because we definitely regarded ourselves as the leading pair in the group. And we came up onto a rounded spur and looked down onto the long ridge leading up towards the summit of Mukut Parbot. And by then, Earl Ridderford was in the lead on this narrow ridge, and he was cutting steps. And we knew there was no way that if we caught up to them, that Earl was going to let us go through and do the leading. And quite frankly, we didn't think they were going to get very far.
Hillary and Lowe return to camp, while Ridderford, Cotter and the Sherpa Pasang press on towards the summit in rising winds and fading light.
Finally, darkness came, and there was no sign of them. And then I can remember emerging from our tent, and I suddenly heard voices. And it was the group returning back to us. And they were triumphant.
They were worried. Ed had put on a meal, and we arrived back there. I was snowblind. We must have been terrifically dehydrated. We couldn't eat any of the food Ed had prepared, and so we all just collapsed into bed.
Well, I was very disappointed because I felt we'd made a serious error of judgment. If we had carried on, as we well could have done, there would have been no doubt that George and I would also have reached the summit of Mukut Parbot.
On the trail out, Hillary broods over this failure. Ridderford's success demonstrates that tremendous will alone can override physical limitations, and that every opportunity has to be ruthlessly exploited. Angry with himself, Hillary just wants to get home as fast as he can.